Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Phoenix Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Christo Scriven, and I'm here with Christel Crawford, a self-awareness coach, deep self-awareness coach. Christel, I want to ask you, first of all, in your framework, in your perspective, what is consciousness?
Great question, actually. I love that you asked that. Consciousness for me is the inclusion of everything without judgment. If we look at the natural world, see over here, the natural world, we have trees and plants and animals and things and earth and rocks and stuff, and none of it does judgment. And back, way back in my personal development journey as a person, it included a trip to a small boutique Bible school. And this guy was an old hippie and who had combined psychology, Eastern mythology, Christianity, kind of into this one thing. And it just spoke to me because it wasn't.
Sounds great.
Yeah, it was awesome. And he was a studier of the Tao, Tao. And I would not consider myself a studier of the Tao, but I did get into it just enough to read a couple books. And one of the stories that really struck me was that the pathway to Tao, which was essentially the inclusion of everything. Again, I'm paraphrasing, forgive me, Taoists, but was a monk sitting by a stream and watching a blade of grass. And he would sit and he would observe that grass until he got the deepest message and meaning from that. To be able to observe the way things are, just the way things are, the way things naturally function. So for me, consciousness is about the inclusion of what's natural. And the one thing that we have going on this planet right now that is completely unnatural is judgment. And we've just learned to do it. It's like baked into the way we operate and the way we talk to ourselves and the way we talk to each other and the way we make our choices, because it is. I mean, we could look all the way back to see where that came from, but it's the one thing also that makes us non-functional. So for me, consciousness is the inclusion of everything without judgment. And if you can access that space inside of you, all your choices change. You access the whole power of the universe, you access, infinite possibilities, you get access to all of you. Kind of just goes on and on and on.
Okay, interesting. There's the idea that everything, in a sense, everything you perceive is a judgment. Even when you are seeing with your eyes, you are judging because you are choosing to look at one thing over something else. So you have to choose what is most important. And to do that, you have to judge. I definitely see the frame of mind of just being in pure awareness and pure presence and seeing everything kind of at once, taking everything in, which is a very natural way of being, but most people, I don't think, have even experienced that. It's very,
Yeah,
it takes a lot of practice to get to that natural point, which
completely.
is
Yeah.
strange.
Yeah.
But
I would like to, can I point out one thing in what you said though? You used
sure.
perceiving and seeing as
Mm-hmm.
one thing, and they're not. And let me
Mm-hmm.
just, and maybe we can banter on this for a second.
Yeah.
Most of us think that they're one thing, that if we can see it with our eyes, then we are also perceiving it. But we have these other senses, and I would call them as perceiving, receiving, knowing, being. And most of them kind of originate from here, which, if even physiologically, here is the seat of all awareness. This is considered our, I'm losing my language on this right now, but this is from where people used to see, which is really perceiving. So we tend to mash up our physical senses with our sense of energies. And then because they're confused, we think, well, then everything I'm perceiving is a judgment. Everything you're perceiving is just everything you're perceiving. And you're perceiving judgment and what is and all these other things all at exactly the same time. The moment you decide anything, and this probably speaks to what you said about what you're perceiving, that's the moment you go to judgment about what you're perceiving. So if this thing I'm perceiving is wrong or bad, then I've judged it. If it's good, then I've judged it. That's what sticks us, is the judgment of what we're perceiving, not that we're perceiving. Because all of us have an immense capability with perception that we almost don't know anything about because it's a lost art. It's not being
Sure.
talked about. And we're kind of hacking it to pieces with our conversations about intuition and authenticity. We're doing our best, but it's not really getting its full day in the sun. So we don't even know, we don't even have clarity on what we're doing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like if I am perceiving, using the example of perceiving, there is sensory input, and the sensory input comes in pure.
Totally.
And I could just open my eyes, and before I even choose to focus in on one particular thing, there is no judgment. But I have to then choose something to focus in on, and that can come from a
Like a
conditioned frame of mind.
totally. Or
Um,
like a presumption of like, this is yeah, absolutely.
in my program I've got on YouTube, in part of the lessons in stage 4 of the Phoenix 90, I talk about two mindfulness practices. The first one is being, I want to use the word judgmental, but not judgment, because judging has such a negative connotation.
Yeah.
But just to discern is the same as judging, right? But
Mm-hmm.
so one way of being mindful is to label your internal sensations. A lot of us don't do this because it's chaotic. Emotions come from the old brain, which is kind of like the chaos emotional brain, and it's really hard to make sense of them. So to label them with a word, which means you have to discern them, judge them, is helpful because it brings that the conscious awareness of that thing kind of into the new brain, the neocortex, the frontal lobes, where language is processed. So if I'm feeling like confused or just a bit lost or angry or whatever, but I'm not really sure, and I can write those words down, I just use those words to express it, I make sense of those things. So that's one way I suggest that people be more mindful, which is actually labeling things, but on the internal world. And then on the flip side, when we perceive things on the outside world, we always jump to conclusions of labeling things. If you see a tree, your brain just goes, "Oh, it's a tree."
Mm-hmm.
Like there's
It's
this
interesting.
judgment there. You just see it as your preconception of that thing without really seeing it for what it is.
Yeah.
And
It,
I used to do this for a while when I used to travel a lot, and I'd go somewhere and I would perceive something through the lens of the previous experiences that I've had that were similar. I was like, "Oh, this beach is kind of nice, but that other beach I went to, like in that other place, was kind of nicer in this way," and I would judge and compare. And I think we're just in this natural state of doing that and allowing ourselves to drop all those judgments and all those labels can just let you experience the pure essence of that moment wherever you are in such an amazing way.
yeah. I do think there's a distinct difference between articulating something, which gives language to it,
Mm,
and judging something. And again, I think we've kind of lumped those two things together. There are things that just are, they are this and they are that. Language is tricky because obviously we're dealing
yes.
with tons and tons of languages around the world, and our first language is energy. So,
Mm,
one of the things I teach people right off the bat when I'm working with them, whether it's an entrepreneur or just a person, is their own inner guidance system, which is your sense of light and heavy, because we are navigating a world of language. And sometimes it is really helpful to put language, like you said, to something, whether that's
mhm,
a feeling or something somebody's doing, because it instantly, if it hits, if it's congruent, it instantly creates relief in our world because it's an acknowledgement of something that is. And that's very
mm,
different than what you were talking about, like looking at a tree with basically closed eyes, and going, "Oh, this is a tree. I know trees, and therefore this tree is like every other tree." Instead of standing under this particular tree, receiving the magnitude of this particular tree and everything it has to tell you that has no words, and
mm,
having a tree experience rather than the judgment of what you have decided a tree is.
mm,
So I do think those two things are very distinct, the articulation of something. And so if you articulate something and it's congruent, it's always going to have a lightness to it. It won't be sticky. It won't be heavy. It's not going to stick you in place. You're not going to be like around it. It'll just be true. And if you articulate something and it's not that thing, it'll feel weird. It'll stick you. It'll stick you. You will have called something something, and you won't be able to get yourself free of it. And it's a big conversation, because sometimes we can say, for example, well, that person is a kind person. But let's say you've called that person a kind person and they're not really. They're stabbing you in the back, but you can't see it and you can't admit it because you've already decided they're kind. And so their actual actions are always going to take you by surprise because of the label that you've decided that they are, that they aren't. And so it sticks everything in place and you don't get freedom with what is. And what is always going to set you free. What isn't is always going to stick you. So I think those two things also are really helpful to distinguish between articulation and judgment.
That's really interesting. I've been throwing around this idea in my head about naivety and arrogance being two sides of the same coin. It's like you can be naive without being arrogant, I think, but you cannot be arrogant without being naive, because when you think you know something, that's naive to think you know something, because you don't know what you don't know. There might be something backing up this idea that you believe to be true, that you think you're right about, that it will prove you wrong. So to be arrogant is also to be naive, which most people that think they know lots of things, I think, will be upset to hear that, because they're the ones that might point at the naive people and say, you shouldn't be naive. But to be arrogant is to be naive. And to be arrogant is to judge, to say, no, that person's nice. That person's not nice. I know that for a fact.
Yeah,
But then you don't, but
yeah,
that might not be the truth
yeah,
of it.
yeah. I definitely think that's one spectrum you could look at. I have a different, completely other point of view, which is that it can be the utmost arrogance to actually know. And most people will consider you arrogant if you know. But knowing doesn't really have anything to do with the labels. It just has to do with, I just know. How do you know you need to go in that direction, for example? I just know. Well, that's really arrogant.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
also could be naive.
But if you didn't have to label it one way or the other, and you could actually trust yourself. You could
Sure.
trust yourself. You are able to know things without explanation. Knowing itself doesn't require any validation.
The knowingness. Where does knowingness fit into kind of Taoism, that essence of being with everything that is, with no judgment, just experiencing reality and taking everything for what it is, what you might perceive or judge as good and bad, you're just perceiving as is. Where does knowingness come into that? How do you know what is the right direction to go in, which you would perceive as good or better than the other direction?
Well, one of the things that's interesting that I learned was that knowing and being and perceiving are in this universe. Good and bad and right and wrong are in this universe. They don't belong together.
Sure.
Knowing has nothing to do with right or wrong or good or bad. You just know.
But it must have something to do with better.
Does it though? Could be an interesting
I don't
conversation.
know, because if you know it's the right direction to go in, there may be. Would you go in a direction that you perceive to be worse?
Well, I would take it out of the good, right, better, worse matrix altogether. When you are in that matrix, you have to judge. Period. Because you have to decide whether or not something is better or worse. So you have to use judgment in order to stay in the right and wrong matrix. If you exit that matrix altogether and you're like, okay, what if there was no right, wrong, or good or bad? What would I choose? Then you instantly access your own ability to choose your way forward into a future that's going to work for you. But it doesn't have anything to do with whether that's right or wrong. It's your sense of what's next, which is very different than your sense of what's right. I don't know if you've ever tried to do the right thing and it wasn't the right thing at all. It was just a thing. It was like, well, I thought it was the right thing, but it didn't turn out to be the right thing. Well, what'd you think the right thing was going to do? Well, I thought the right thing was going to do this thing, but it didn't do that thing. Must not have been the right thing. Must got to choose the other right thing. I mean, it's a shit show.
Yeah. It can be very hard to discern whether what you think is your knowingness to think this is the way that's drawing me forward, that I know is just the way for me.
Yeah, in that moment.
And whether you think it's the right thing, because if you go that way and then you think, oh, it probably wasn't the right. But I mean, in my experience, when you're in that state, that more state of oneness, of pure consciousness, there's no regrets. You don't think, oh, that was a big mistake to do that.
There's no regret, no fear, no doubt, no anything in the universe of infinite possibilities, which is really what you are. You are a universe of infinite possibilities. And this is the interesting thing about, when you look, we have been, the right and wrong framework has been imposed on us and we've adopted it. We're like, oh, well, I want to be right and I don't want to do it wrong. And I care about people and I don't want to hurt people. So that matrix makes sense to me. But then what we do with that matrix most of the time is we use it to judge ourselves. And we make choice making very hard. When in reality, your reality and my reality is very ease. It's very ease and it has no judgment to it. Now, it doesn't mean we're very good at living from that. But to try to get it right so that we don't hurt ourselves and other people, we go into our heads and we think a lot and we try to get it right. And then we make that right choice and sometimes it's super anticlimactic. Sometimes it doesn't do the thing. Other times it does the thing. It's random and it's what it creates. And on top of that, we've had to use a lot of energy and a lot of judgment to get there. What if there is a completely other possibility for living?
You've heard the story of the Chinese farmer.
Tell me more.
And the horses and his son. Okay. I'm sure everyone's had this. There's a Chinese farmer, and one day a horse turns up randomly. I think this is how, I'm getting it wrong. I think this is how it goes. I'll tell my own version.
You're
Horse randomly turns up at his house, and he wakes up one morning. There's a horse there, really nice, beautiful horse, and all the neighbors come by and say, "Wow, this is really lucky. This is good fortune." And the old man says, "Maybe, maybe not." And then he gets his son to start training the horse, and that night the horse runs off, and everyone comes and says, "Oh, bad luck. The horse is gone. That's a shame." And he said, "Maybe, maybe not." And then next day, the horse comes back with 10 other horses, and then everyone says, "Oh, this is great." He says, "Maybe, maybe not." Then the son is training all the horses and falls off and breaks his leg. And everyone says, "Oh, this is terrible." And he says, "Maybe, maybe not." And then the next day, the army comes through, recruiting young men to go to war, unlikely to return. And because his son's got a broken leg, they don't recruit him. And everyone says, "Wow, that's really fortunate." And the farmer says, "Maybe, maybe not." And that's where it ends, which is kind of inconclusive. But it's one of those things that you don't know the long-term repercussions of something. But at the same time, this is such a deep conversation because it pulls in so many different, like, what is judgment? What is oneness? What is duality or non-duality? Because your frame of mind is really non-duality. Yeah. There is no judgment. There is no right or wrong in non-duality. But within the oneness, there is a duality.
I mean, duality is included. Is oneness dual, or is it inclusive?
It splits into duality? Two. Like, everything is divisible again and again and again. Like, that's what, if you look at one small area of life, like a glass that you drink water from, there is a million things to know about that glass. Mm-hmm. Everything is divisible into so many details. But when you go right to the top of the hierarchy, it's just everything is one.
Yes.
But
so how do we apply that to our lives?
The karma from the Eastern perspective, that there are good deeds and bad deeds. And if you do good things, good karma comes back to you. Who is judging what is good and what is bad? I used to think this quote was really powerful. I think it's from Shakespeare. It said, "Nothing is good nor bad, but thinking makes it so." But then I read Man's Search for Meaning and the Gulag Archipelago, about the catastrophes in the 20th century with the Nazis and the Soviets. And I didn't think that was true anymore.
So the question is, what's going to work for you?
Yeah. Well, okay. So yeah, you're talking about what's functional.
Yeah. What makes sure that what allows it's really about what's functional. It's really about what's going to work for you.
Hmm.
Every one of us has the choice to live from duality. We were raised that way, good, bad, right, and wrong. I was raised very religious. I know that well. In fact, I was just talking to my brother who's navigating some big change in his life, and he's still at 40 years old out creating his addiction to duality. Like, this is black and this is white. And he's like, and the thing is, Christel, it's affecting my job. Like, I'm not able to be as good of a leader. It's affecting my personal life. I don't end up fighting with people. Like that addiction to duality is not actually allowing my life to work, which is the only reason he's looking at letting it go in favor of nuance. But if you the thing that I use to guide my choice about what's functional for me is what allows me, the being, to have the most space and the most freedom to choose within it. And having come from a very long lineage of right and wrong, that was not the way. I used that to judge myself into wanting to die. I wanted to kill myself at 37. So then I spent 10 years pursuing the like basically the let going of judgment, and it was such a process, because what happens when you choose to let go of judgment is you lose all reference points for choice, which is why most of us hang on to it. We're like, but if I don't have anything to choose from, then what do I choose? So we're weak in the area of trusting ourselves to choose things, pretty sure that if we let go of right and wrong and good and bad, we're just going to go around stabbing people in the eye with spoons. Turns out that's not really true. We are actually trustworthy, but because we've never let ourselves know that, we hang on to duality as a reference point. And what I think is really sad about that is that now we're all out there running around trying to find the right way, not finding it, and getting more and more frustrated and kind of psychically sick, because the very being that we should be able to trust, ourselves,
Hmm.
we don't. And we have nobody saying that that's the thing we need to develop. So I think duality has robbed us of an incredible resource. And my target is to restore that to myself and to as many people as are willing to have it.
I've never heard anyone use that phrase, addicted to duality. I love that.
Yeah.
And it's so true. And it could be a good check mark to think, okay, how addicted to duality am I
Yeah,
today?
and like if I didn't have to get this next choice right, what would I choose? And really looking here instead of up here, because every time we look up and we're thinking, we're looking for a reference point that will tell us that this next choice is okay, that it's right, that it's got context somewhere, that somebody else has done it and tried it and succeeded with it. When
Mm,
instead, if we would look here, we would be led forward with something different, something sustainable. If you lead yourself forward in your life with you and what you know, you will always have energy for what's next. If you always have to go here, you're going to have to find energy from outside of you to energize your life and your choices. And they're going to have to be validated and right. And you're going to have people on side. And it's going to take all this other network and ecosystem
mm.
that aren't required when you lead from here. The tricky part is when you lead from here, there's nobody to validate it. So, like, people might ask you, well, why this? And you're like, I don't
Yeah,
know. Yeah. Because.
it's interesting. It does transcend lots of different systems, even like biological systems, like as you're talking about, like motivation. Why do you do something?
Absolutely.
It's like, oh well, just kind of feel, but it's not really a feeling. It's kind of just a knowingness that it's the right thing. But then again, language is falling short. Like there's
Yeah.
only a certain amount of words in the English language, and energy is infinite.
Yeah. I know. It's a lost art. I get that what you and I and the people that we're connected to are really looking at restoring, even if we haven't said it yet, is the lost art of knowing and following the energy. If you look at all the different things that all of us are interested in, breath work, meditation, mindfulness, all these ancient, the study of Taoism, we are seeking something that I don't even know if we fully articulated for ourselves. Primarily, like the development, we're calling it the development of ourselves. But if you go all the way underneath there, there's a something, there's an ache, there's a knowing, there's something that we are restoring to ourselves. And the way I see it is we're restoring the lost art of energy, following it, knowing it, speaking it, having it, being it, so that we can fill in the blank, build a business, be happy, have great relationships, have a thriving body, have a sustainable financial life. I mean, like all the other stuff are fruits from you having you and being able to grok things and move with things and choose from things. So it's a
great
lost
comparison
art.
to self-worth, like when you can let go of the judgments of I'm good or bad at this, and that's very self-esteem based. I love this because it's changed my life so much, and I learned this from an old guy who came to one of my meetings online, and he'd authored a book called The Self-Worth Safari, and he made this distinction between self-esteem and self-worth. Self-esteem is dependent, is you feeling good depending on either the outcomes of your actions or the actions themselves. Like if I'm not behaving in a certain way, I don't feel good about myself. Whereas self-worth is just knowing your worth inherently without having to do anything, without having to get any outcome. This is I'm worthy, which is a very deeply religious idea as well. And it really speaks to what you're talking about as well, of not needing to do anything, not needing external validation from other people or even from yourself, thinking this is the right thing or wrong thing. It's just I am worthy as I am without having to do anything. And in my experience, when I deeply embody that, when I contemplate that, when I understand it deeply, that's when my most aligned action like is expressed. And that's also when I treat myself in the highest possible way. Because when I'm not feeling good and I have this kind of self-esteem thing and there's this thing that I need to finish and there's this thing and I'm not doing everything I want, I end up treating myself. I self-harm in whatever possible way. Like I'm on my phone too much. I eat unhealthy things. I just don't treat myself properly. And that's a form of self-harm.
Mm.
But when I have this inherent sense of self-worth, when I actually am in that space of oneness, you could say, of non-judgment, then I treat myself properly, what I would perceive as properly, because I perceive myself as worthy of the highest possible treatment. There is a part of me that is worthy of the highest possible treatment.
And
And
I would blow that conversation out a bit into the wild, open, wild west of the universe and go, would an infinite being, which is what we are, need to be worthy or something else? Like here's something that I play with, and this is helpful and speaks to what you were talking about, but in a sideways way. If you can't have a conversation with a tree about a concept, it's made up. So for example, would you have a conversation with a tree about self-worth? Are you worthy? And the tree would just stand there and tree at you.
yeah, I just got a beckoning yes in my mind from the
Yeah.
tree.
I mean, to be honest, the tree just wouldn't even know what you were talking about. It'd be like asking a horse or an animal, right? When you ask them things, they just look at you and chew the grass. It's like it doesn't have any relevance in their world whatsoever.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, it's inherent.
It's
What's
literally, it's inherent. So we have made it into a thing because deep down we believe we're not worthy. So it's only people that believe they're not worthy that need to think I am worthy. So what I would
sure.
say is go way below that and go, what if worth has nothing to do with it? What if we've made something relevant that isn't relevant at all? Is
I
this
feel like
what
that's
you want?
yeah, that is a very Taoist Buddhist perspective. No, I'm bringing it back up to the logical again.
It's fine.
That's what it seems like to me. The isness. Like, what the hell does worth even mean? What does it
Yeah. Well,
matter?
to judge yourself worthy, you have to first judge yourself as unworthy.
The duality of being worthy and unworthy.
What if we took everything off the polarity? What if it wasn't about worth or not worth, right and wrong, good and bad? This is
Mm-hmm.
electrical. What's acoustical is something else. And at our core, we are acoustical. We are acoustical energy that has tried to make ourselves into a computer, to make things make sense, to make sure they're justified, to make sure we're right and not wrong, to make sure that we win and don't lose. And
Mm.
that system has us trapped in judgment. And my target is to go, well, what if you can just leave that system, which of course takes practice, and come over here to like
Mm.
infinite being where you get to choose and you get to choose again and you get to choose again and you get to choose again and you get to get all this information and you can self-judge if you want to, or you can practice in a way that allows you to not self-judge. What if you didn't judge yourself? What if the very fact that you want to choose it is enough?
You're bypassing kind of every level. So up here, you kind of have that self-esteem level, the logical, and then down deep below, you have that feeling that you don't feel worthy, and then you go, "Well, I am worthy. I feel worthy without having to do anything." But then way below that is just the essence
What
of
if
who
that's
you
not
are, which
relevant?
just doesn't matter about any of it, and just going to straight to the source, and you just kind of let's just wipe the slate clean and go straight to the source. What comes to mind with that? I like to play devil's advocate, and I like
Sure.
to. I mean,
Let's do it.
I believe in your perspective, and I've thought about it too, and it's great. But I think it's a great way to live. But then when I think, okay, how functional is it? How well does it work? What does it stand up against? Different ideas. Whereas if someone has some internal trauma or some dysfunction they've picked up over their life, that just plays out, like some just patterns that they have picked up, whether it's an addiction or anything like that, and they go back to that place, and then what they knowingly feel is the right thing to do isn't, because uh, they have this block in their energy field. I don't know how you'd word it, but something is there skewing their energy off, so they don't know that even the knowingness is wrong, because
Mhm.
that they are being hijacked biologically by their neurochemicals or whatever it is.
Mhm. I was deeply abused. I came to this work sexually abused, out of 2 marriages, suicidal, anxiety ridden, depressed. I had every single negative pattern you could possibly have as a human being.
Right.
And religious abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse. Like, so I know much about this. And it did
Mm-hmm.
take me 10 years working with consciousness tools to recover. I had to recover my sense of knowing because I couldn't tell anymore. My body had lost all sensation. I had locked all the trauma into my cells, which is what we do when we're deeply traumatized.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I remember having conversations with colleagues that were in the same. I had been certified; they were certified, but they would talk about being able to perceive energy on their skin. I couldn't feel anything. I had to do like days and days and hours and hours and hours of energetic body work to get access again to my ability to sense, because I was so deeply entrenched in coping and surviving the world that I had left behind my more nuanced sensitivities in favor of survival. So I know that intimately inside and out. And so it isn't an overnight thing what I'm talking about. We're talking very high level, what could be theoretical stuff for a lot of people. But when it really comes to recovering yourself, it is a process. And it just has to, whatever it is, just has to be enough of an interest to you to start. Because recovering a person would be metaphorically similar to recovering a piece of land that has just had oil sitting on it for years and the soil is depleted, and you know it's going to take a minute. right? There's steps to recovering that land. It's recoverable because deep within that soil, it has the elements to be a generative source of nutrients and things. But it's going to take care. It's going to take care and time and steps and choices to develop that piece of property into something that everyone can enjoy, you could grow food on, etc. And that was basically my life. So yeah, for the traumatized person especially, this is 100% a process. It's just going that I'll have that, knowing that was for me. I started out wanting to be happy and I wanted to have good relationships. That was my only two asks in the whole world. I was 100% sure that I was the wrong element in all of it. I knew that I was damaged. I didn't know how to change it. And that's all I wanted. Just help me be happy because I cannot figure this out. And it turns out the primary thing that I was doing to not be happy I was constantly hating myself, just constantly about everything. My choices were wrong. The way I was in the world was wrong. Everything about me was wrong from my point of view. So it took me 10 years to really recover me, but it's possible.
Wow, good for you. I think I am judging you positively. I don't. Yeah, that's really great, and that sounds like a really hard journey, and I'm glad you're on the other side of it. And good for you for doing the work. My mind is going back to the judgment thing because you were judging yourself. That's not functional. That's not helpful.
I almost killed myself
That's
from
not
it.
healthy.
No, I hated
Yeah,
myself.
I'm glad
yeah.
you didn't. I'm glad you're still here because you're doing important stuff. But at a certain point, you had to think, there's something better than this.
Yeah. And that was the only thing that kept me hanging on. I just knew there had to be something else possible. I couldn't find it. It felt like I couldn't find it. I had tried therapy, I tried hypnotherapy, breath work, I had tried religion for me. I had seen a nutritionist for a year and a half. I'd done BIE. I was still suicidal. Like I would still revert back to this place because what was happening was the energetic root of where I was truly functioning from was never being addressed. Everything that I had tried had stayed too much on the surface. And down here, I was a roiling sea of self hatred. And you could call that self esteem and you could call that self worth, and that sort of touches on it. But it was a total belief that I was the wrong element in the world. I was just wrong. And I just believed it to my bones. And it took me years to layers of like a Parmesan block, just layers and layers of just work and gentleness and energetic work to unlock all the trauma that I had absorbed. It was just a process. I forget what you said. It was relevant, but
I think you're living proof that how that this stuff works.
that's why I do it.
Like how much better things can become, and at times you don't realize how unhappy you are until you make a change, and then you think and you look back and you have perspective. You think, "Wow, I was really unhappy." Some people, they know how unhappy they are, or they get to that point where it's a crisis and they think, "Wow, I just have to change something." But to do this, I'm bringing it back out to the theoretical level. I'm bringing it back out to the conceptual level. You have to judge, and I like me.
I
In a
would
sense,
challenge that.
me hearing your story and thinking, "Wow, that's really inspiring and incredible to hear." I'm perceiving it as a good thing. So I cannot dissect this. If it was the opposite way around, and you didn't do this journey, and it went downhill from that point, you didn't hit that crossroads and make the change. Even if I was in that place of isness, I'm not just perceiving everything as it is, I would. That's a very interesting experiment.
Can I speak to parts of it? Or do you want to keep going?
I'm actually I'm trying to imagine it now. If I'm in that place, there's no judgment, and I'm envisioning these two pathways that someone could go on, and one's that they're coming downhill and they're at a point where they can make a change, but they either do or they don't, and which is which. And if I'm even in that place, I think in that place there's a deep. People say that God is love, and with love comes deep compassion. Right? And Jesus was supposed to be super compassionate. That's what the story says. And Jesus was a manifestation of God. And that's just one analogy, bringing in one narrative to the story. And in that place, even in that place, which you could say is like pure isness, but there is a deep compassion there. There's a deep love there. There's a deep purity there. There's still a desire for the healing of suffering, to make things better, to better something that you think could do with bettering.
Well, you and I, and many like us, have an awareness of a different kind of world. And this is where we have to start to articulate the difference between awareness and judgment. Awareness is always lighter. Judgment is always going to be sticky. You and I have an awareness of a different kind of world that's possible. We know because we are it. I am it. When I came in, I have vague recollections of coming into the world, and I was like what I would call a snowflake. I know that term is used different now, but like just like really meltable, like tender and aware, and like just a walking nerve ending of, sensory pleasure. I just loved everything. Everything was fascinating to me. And I was like I was all eyes. I was just watching everything. And so there's an awareness of a different world that's possible than the one we live in, even inside of ourselves. That awareness of a different world that's possible was also the thing that drove me forward into healing and trying to change what I knew must be changeable, because no one is supposed to live like this. I'm not supposed to be living in all this self-hatred. So we have this awareness, and what tends to cover up awareness is judgment. And we do the best we can, right? We're like, well, it's a better world and we should want to do a better world. Is it better or just other? It's just different. It's a completely different world that I'm aware of, that doesn't have judgment, that includes trees and animals and weirdos like us. And we all get to it's not a kumbaya world. We just all get to be different and ourselves, and nobody judges. That's the world I'm aware of. Is that a world ever going to fully exist? But it can exist for me.
I think the language is failing us, because the word judgment can be used by different people for different things. Most people have a negative connotation of it, like, oh, I'm eating this cake, don't judge me. You're
Yeah, of
judging me
course.
for not going to university and starting a business.
We have
In
a
a
judgment
negative
about
sense.
judgment.
Judgment. But you can also judge, but judgment doesn't have to be negative. When you judge someone and say, wow, that was amazing,
That could be awareness. This is where I think we need a bigger conversation about the difference between awareness and judgment. Awareness is always going to be light. It's an acknowledgement.
okay,
That it could be a total acknowledgement of that person is amazing, instead of the judgment of like, that's amazing. That'll always be light. If it's true, it's light. If it's a judgment that that's amazing, it's going to be sticky and something's going to be weird. That's why we need to talk about what's our navigation system. What are we listening to? What
okay.
creates freedom and what creates a trap?
So judgment, in a sense, is it's a comparison to something
Yes.
else, and awareness is just an observation,
Just it,
a
exactly.
natural observation.
Yeah.
And I think if you're observing something, because like eating cake is not always bad.
Well, it's never
if
good or bad. It's just cake.
if you eat like a whole cake every day,
It's going to create something.
right?
And this is where, if we don't judge what it creates, and we can just look at every single choice we make creates something. If I choose, for example, in my business to make 0 offers, I'm going to experience the fruits of that. If, on the other hand, in my business, I choose to make many offers, I will experience the fruits of that. And it won't be what I think they're going to be. I may not make as much as I think. But again, we have all these choices. We can eat the whole cake every single day. We could have a little bit on Saturdays. We could have it 5 times a day. We could have it 0. We have lots of choices with cake. And every choice with cake creates a different future.
And all those futures are okay.
They are unjudged until you judge it as wrong or right. They are just futures.
Yeah, I think it's one of these paradoxes that we just can't comprehend.
I don't know if that's true.
Well, because you shouldn't judge until you judge.
But I do get this it's a big paradigm shifting conversation. Like to move from being in the world of trying to find and do the right thing, which is where I lived, and I still wrestle with that sometimes, to a space where you just let yourself choose. It's completely reference pointless. Like it's rattling. It's a totally different thing. But in the world where you don't judge your choices, you get to be. You get to be. You get to be all of you.
I think it's interesting because we're living beings, and I think the meaning of life is to grow. I don't know what the meaning of existence is. No idea about that. But the meaning of life is to grow and thrive.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
Is it the meaning or is it our nature?
I think that's the same thing. It's the purpose of life, which is the meaning. Like when
just devil's advocate here for a second. Go with me on the tree and let's just break this open, because I think it's a good conversation.
Yeah.
So is the tree's purpose to grow, or is it the tree's nature to grow?
Both.
Well, what's a purpose?
It's the reason for being.
A reason. Yeah. Does a tree need a reason, or does it just grow?
Well, the tree has an ancestor, and it hopefully has a later, I don't know what the word, a child of some sort, and that the reason it is there is because it had an ancestor who that did its duty, in a sense. It didn't not duty. It.
But do you see how you're talking about the tree from the paradigm of like family and ancestry and all that stuff that comes with culture? And
no, but that's not culture. That is life, because that's how life continues.
Well,
I'm not talking about existence. I'm not talking about a rock. I'm talking about life, like nature, how a tree, an animal, humans, not like planets smashing into each other. I have no idea why they do that. They have
no map.
That's just happening. But a tree has a purpose, I think, and its purpose is to grow and to reproduce.
Could be, or that could just be its nature. And I would challenge you to look at both of those for yourself, because I think you're going to find a lot more information.
I'm happy to go into it more now. The nature of a tree is so you could say, is it just to be, like it's just to exist, which goes back to that existence side of things. Just
but if we look at like a seed, an acorn or whatever, within that seed is the entire lifespan of a tree, and if it gets the right set of circumstances, it's an oak tree. It could be 200 years old. Okay, if nobody cuts it down for toilet paper. Right there in that seed.
Oak tree toilet paper. Nice.
You're right.
It could be a business.
Do you know that that's a whole rabbit trail. Anyway, but is that the purpose of that acorn, or is that just seeded within that acorn?
Well, it has DNA in there, right? It's encoded in there, like it has genes.
It's just there.
In there. It's just there, but it has a function. Its function can be to grow.
Its function is natural to it. If it's given, this is just my argument, I realize that, but if it's given the right circumstances with which, it will just grow.
it has an agency to grow.
What
It
does that
can't
mean, agency?
that it has the capacity, the
Yeah,
capability.
it's natural to it. It's
Yeah,
innate.
but
Growth is innate.
just a rock can't do that.
Rocks don't have the same nature.
They don't have. They just exist.
I
They are
mean,
not alive. Well, I mean, depends who you talk to, right? People think that everything has a consciousness. I don't know about that, but an acorn has the capacity to grow and thrive and to replicate. To
if you plant that acorn in the sun and the soil and the water that it needs to thrive, it will naturally thrive.
Mhm.
If it doesn't have those things, it will do what it can with what it's been given. None of that
But
has anything to do with the reason. It's just like it's going to do what it can with what it's been given. And within it, though, is embedded the DNA to be able to do all these incredible things, but not because there's a reason, just because that's what it does.
Mhm.
So if we look at the natural world as a metaphor for us, then
Yeah.
is it in our nature just to grow? It's like I know for me, I can't separate out, like I'm just we call it lifelong learner and all this other stuff, seeker, but it's like in my nature. I wouldn't be able to stop myself choosing new things unless I killed myself. And that's so dramatic, but like I will always be looking and learning and going, and because it's in my nature. I like,
Does
so
that have?
yeah, keep
What is
going.
the meaning of that? Does that have a meaning? Is it
Well,
just nature?
what's the purpose of finding the meaning?
To have a really nice, robust ego that knows things.
Nothing in nature does meaning. So why are we doing it? We're doing it to
Well,
find
animals play.
yeah, or they eat each other. And none of it
They
has
eat
any
each other
meaning.
too, yeah, and they can play with their food as well,
Exactly.
which is kind of
They
disturbing.
they don't
Yeah.
make it meaningful. I mean, I went to South Africa on a safari and got to witness a pride of lions, and the male lion just mounts the female 32 times a day, and none of it means anything. If we're going to have a whole conversation around that in the human world, we've made it mean something. We've made it, this is right, this is wrong. It's like meaning has to be invented for it to mean something to you and not mean something to me. It's got to be invented.
Sure. I guess. Oh, maybe it's the language thing. Like, what does a meaning mean? What does it
What's the
mean to
purpose of
mean
meaning?
something? What's
For
the
what?
purpose of meaning? Ah, mind blank.
Yeah. There
There
isn't
is
one.
none.
I mean, the
Yeah.
only reason you would make something mean something is to accomplish something. The church, the old and if you, I studied church history, they
Hmm.
made certain activities meaningful so that they could penalize people, so that they could raise money and have ultimate power. I mean, you could, if you start looking at the history of meaning in all these different scenarios, we make cheating meaningful in relationships. Why? For what reason? So that we know that this person is going to be faithful to us, so that, but at the bottom of it, so that we can feel safe and stable and we can trust that this is a stable place to whatever. I mean,
Mm.
it's a
Well, that
big
has a meaning.
conversation meaning.
That has a meaning then for that.
Does it?
There is the meaning there because life life's nature is to endure. You could say that. It wants to. There's something there within us, say, that wants to endure. It would be a shame for everything to cease to exist in nature.
Pleasure.
That's why,
Yeah.
like, if you're suicidal, you want to live. Like, there's something in you. Okay, delete what I just said. Because it's a hard subject to talk around in this way.
Some people
But
don't want to be here. It's
exactly,
a,
yeah, this is why I stopped myself. That's true.
mm.
But the our nature is to grow and thrive. This is what you've been talking about.
Well,
That
I
there's
wonder.
something in you that wants to do, to express, to explore, to adventure,
Yeah.
to
To
whatever it
be.
is, to be. But it's not just about sitting and being,
But
because
we assume that there's no activity in being. When a dog is being themselves, they're so active, for example. Like if you, again, let's pull it over into the natural world and look. When a dog is just being, like they're running, they're playing, they're licking, they're moving, they're barking, they're doing. Like this is them just being.
Just being their natural selves.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
But there are genes encoded into them for certain reasons that are functional.
What was that?
So in their DNA, there's genes, there's behaviors encoded into them that serve a function. Most things do for some reason. Nothing just, I don't think anything really exists in nature that doesn't serve a function, because it wouldn't have evolved that way. Everything has some sort of function, whether it's dysfunctional, which is a function of trying to protect yourself in some way, but it's dysfunctional.
Yeah.
But everything serves a function. So what I was trying to get at originally with this, the meaning of life is to thrive, is that there is something there that is willing us forward. There is something that wants us to grow and thrive, and, like I said, explore and adventure and all these things. And there are certain things that are dysfunctional and functional. And I'm not sure whether those things are good or bad, but there has to be a point where it's the whole judgment question, and going back to it is hard, because there are certain things in my mind that are better than worse. Like if there is a tree, I plant a tree and it grows. It's an oak tree and it grows for like 50 years and it grows really well. It's great. But then one year it just decides to shed all its leaves in the summer and then grow them in the winter, but they all freeze and die. And
well, a tree wouldn't do that because it's not functional.
well, if it was a dysfunctional tree,
Have you met a dysfunctional tree that does that, or do all trees?
I have to Google it to see if it's ever happened.
That doesn't exist.
It might.
But this
have
is the thing about nature.
But it does happen. It does happen in animals and in humans. Right, eating a cake a day might be a similar kind of thing where it's not serving a function.
But
it is serving a function, but it's a dysfunction. But which is like the same tree. The tree is like, I'm losing my leaves at the wrong time of the year, and it's because it's dysfunctional. It's still functioning, but it's functioning not in the best way it could.
But this is where if you can be with somebody, let's take the person who's eating a cake a day.
I'm talking big cake, big one.
I know,
not like a little one.
Yeah, big cake. Huge cake, like
yeah,
feeds 24 people cake every single day.
Mm-hmm.
For that person, eating that cake every day is serving a function. That doesn't mean that the function is contributing to a greater future for them and their body, but it is serving a function. And in the work that I did over the 10 years that I did it, one of the biggest gifts I could give people was go, okay, so like, let's just say I'm eating a cake a day and I want to stop. That's what I want to get out of this session. Okay, cool. What is eating a cake of day, eating one cake a day, what is that gifting you that you're not looking at?
Sure.
Because most of us choose these things and we're super unconscious about it. We don't want to do it anymore. We want help stopping, but we don't even acknowledge for what reason we're doing it in the first place. So that person could be unconsciously like, well, if I eat a cake a day, I know my mom's going to love me. Sure, the reasons way back in the past, it's not relevant anymore. They're an adult now. That's not going to work anymore for the future they want to have. But until we look at everything we choose has a function from our point of view, including holding on to right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean it's the function that's going to create the greatest future, but it does mean that from our point of view, it's correct.
Maybe right and wrong is not the best frame, but better and worse, I can't let go of.
Same frame.
I don't think. Because functional, dysfunctional, maybe just functional, dysfunctional. But is functional better than dysfunctional?
But why does it have to be better or worse from your point of view?
But is it? I'm just saying if it's nature. If it's the nature of function, dysfunction to be better or worse, is it better or worse?
Is a dead tree better than a live tree?
I wouldn't, no difference, yeah.
And also, that's not the framework to put in dead and live trees, because the dead tree makes homes for animals. It amends the soil. It does all these amazing things that in its live state it couldn't do, but it was doing all these
Mm-hmm.
amazing things in its live state too. So there is no better or worse in nature, except for when we disrupt the natural balance by strip mining the earth of what it needs to be functional. And then we can look
Mm.
at, oof, that earth is probably better off in its natural state. How do I restore it to its natural state? Well, I need to add this and do this and do this. But not
Why is it?
because,
Why is it better?
well, so then is better the right word or is more generative the right word?
Generative, functional, more with the capacity to thrive.
There.
Mm.
So when you
So
look at judgment,
life is
judgment,
better when it has the ability to thrive to its maximum
well,
potential.
there's greater possibilities, which is different than better. There's more possibility available when you don't strip mine your being from judgment, when you don't take judgment
Oh.
and strip yourself of all worth as a being, of all caring. And when you strip caring from yourself, you become the least valuable product in your own world, and you won't create and you won't be the gift that you actually are with other people, because
Mhm.
you've made yourself the smallest piece of possibility that you can. So it's greater possibilities.
Something really uh, interested me when I was listening to Jordan Peterson interview his wife, Tammy Peterson, and they were talking about their kind of dysfunction and their poison. You know, you pick your poison. If there's something for you that's going to just ruin your life, what's it going to be? And she said hers was homelessness. And I was like, what? That doesn't, for me, prior to that, I kind of thought as homelessness as this thing that everyone wants to avoid. But she said it was a temptation because it was this, like, for her, it was no responsibility. You don't have to look after a house. You don't have to have a job. You don't have to do anything. You can just live on the street and just be a street person. And that's really interesting to me, and how someone, I guess, could get to that point where are they honoring the higher side of themselves, or are they just being? Have humanity got to the point where they are now, where we have the technology to do this? This is awesome. Is it good? That's another question,
Yeah.
an entirely different question, right? But is like someone thinking, do you know what? I don't want the responsibility of a house, a job, relationships, to be part of society and the community anymore. I just want to go and be homeless on the street. Is that better or worse?
Well, maybe a different framework that anybody could play with is, instead of is it better or worse, go, does that create fewer possibilities or more possibilities? And this is something I talk about a lot in
Mm,
following the energy. When we talk about getting in touch with energy and paying attention to energy, it's like, well, why? Because the energy of a choices just create. That's all they do.
mm,
If you make the choice to go live on the street, that just creates something. You make a choice to eat a sheet pan cake every single day, that just creates something. And choices create futures, or they destroy futures. So if you have interest in being a conscious element in the world, and I would say most of our world is functioning from unconsciousness. We're not asking ourselves, if I create
mhm.
this device, will it create a greater future? We're like, if I create this device, am I going to make a lot of money? Is primarily what's happening.
Yes.
But we could be more conscious about what we're choosing and care. We could care if we wanted about, if I choose this, will it create greater possibilities? If yes, then I'll choose it. And if no, then I might not. But that is so personal to each person. That's so, what do you want your life to be like? From where do you want to be choosing? Do you want to be
Mm,
choosing from right and wrong and good and bad and better and worse? Or would you like to be choosing from, if my choices create, I know that I'm that powerful. So I want to choose the things to the best of my ability that create greater for everyone. So what do
mhm.
I need to learn? What tool do I need to use to get the awareness of what a choice is going to create before I make it? And there is a tool you can use. What will my life be like in 5 years if I choose this? Yes or no? Like, you get a sense of the future that creates before you choose it. Now, we're not going to do that for every choice, although maybe we should, but we are responsible for our choices, and they do create lesser or greater futures. And so what do we want to be the source of?
That exercise is really powerful. That's part of basically one of the tools in the Phoenix Growth community, which you're a part of, for vision building, being able to extend your perception out into the future and see where things lead. That's something I started doing when I was quite a bit younger, when I was on my early days of personal development, and I was kind of looking at my own actions and things I'd done in the past, and then I was using other people as a reference point. And you could say this is judging, or it's being aware. I'm observing other people, and I thought, well, that person has been on the path that I have been on for longer than me, and taking the similar actions, and this is where they've led. This is where they've ended up, and this is probably where they're going. And if I continue taking the same actions and behaving in a similar way, I'm probably going to just follow in their footsteps. And that was really beneficial to me. Yeah,
Cool.
Looking at that.
Yeah.
And,
I mean,
and
that, to me,
realizing
that's
probably
observation.
not the best thing.
Yeah. What did that create? Oh, well, I don't know if I want to choose that. That's
But also, to me, I mean, I think it's the meaning of the word judgment. Keep coming back to this, and we've been talking about it for like an hour now.
It's a huge conversation. I love that we're talking about it.
But for me, it's a judging court is there to judge over someone's case, and they can judge positively or they can judge negatively. They can set someone free or they can imprison someone. They're there to judge whether they don't choose whether the person is guilty or not, but they do judge. So I guess they don't have the power to set someone free or not, but they do judge how long they should go to prison and what sort of sentence they have. So I'm not sure if judging is. I think it has a negative connotation. I think when it's at ourselves to judge ourselves, it can have a negative connotation. But at the same time, when we create a vision of the future, even in the way we were just talking about, like projecting a line of behavior out into the future, and say that it's a positive behavior. If you think, wow, if I actually meditated every day or journaled every day or exercised every day or made 100 calls or posted every day for however long, I could become this version of me. I have this ideal in the future. And then you are then comparing your current state to that state. It becomes an ideal that you compare against. And you think that would be better or that would be worse.
But
Which I could say is a judgment. Yes.
But you and I aren't saying the same thing either. You're talking about vision casting and using your imagination. I'm talking about sensing what a choice will create energetically.
Okay.
They're two different things. So one, the what you were talking about does require a lot of judgment. If I become this person that I imagine I will become if I do this action, that's better. That's all judgment. That's assuming that the person you are now is worse. So basically, you're using your vision of the future to judge yourself. And most of the reason we do that, if there is one, is because we believe that without judgment, we won't self-improve. So I must judge where I'm at as less in order to achieve what I've decided is more. Another way of looking at that is like, okay, this is me without meditation. What do I see? Well, I get up in the morning and the first thing I do is I check my phone and then I check my bank balance and then I'm in a world of shit because my bank balance doesn't have what I want and then I don't really like how I feel after, and so I have 5 cookies with my coffee instead of maybe that smoothie that could be do something else. So you just observe like who is me without meditation. All right, cool. I'm obviously aware of something with meditation. It keeps pinging me and I'm not listening. So I wonder what I'm aware of that meditation would create for me. And you might get a sense of that, maybe even an instant download, not necessarily a picture, but a sense. And if you followed that sense, you would very likely be creating a greater future. You don't know what that future is going to look like because we can't. Futures are undefined possibilities. But you do have a sense that if you choose that regularly, you're going to create something greater for yourself. It's going to be different than what you're currently experiencing. And in that, you don't have to judge what you're currently experiencing. You're just like, well, currently I'm creating a pile of, I think what I'm going to do is just something else just to see what that's like. I want to experience who I am on meditation.
Who you are on meditation. Wow. Like some illegal substance. That's interesting way of framing it. I love it. I do. I think it's great. And I like the idea of, personally, I like the idea of being able to straddle the line between both worlds, between that world and the judgment world I'm talking about. And maybe it is to my own detriment, potentially, but to be accepting of myself now, but also to compare myself to a future state and but also feel that sense of this could be better. There are things that I do that with, for sure, that I don't really have a very logical sense of something being better or how it would be better, but I just have a sense that it will be maybe a more authentic, or just
something more true, something
more
easier,
true, more pure.
Yeah.
Maybe pure is not a good word either.
Well, and we're going to do the best we can with our language. But the bottom line is, like, when you and me, when we start to sense and we're gravitated towards a conversation or a direction, that's our own innate compass going with that. Whatever that is, whatever that way of living without judgment is, I don't know if I can do that, but there's something about it that is pulling you forward, and that's the thing you can trust. So it's, and you're included just as you are. That's called, I use the word allowance for that instead of acceptance. It's like, there's just allowance for all that you are right now, forever, and always. The only thing that is relevant is, what else would you like? What are you stretching for? What do you want to have as your functional space of being? I got into consciousness, and maybe, I know we're getting to our time. I got into consciousness via quantum physics. I would not consider myself an expert. I'm a lay person on all levels, but I was studying quantum physics. And when I saw it, I was like, that's the way things work. Like, a molecule, when it's observed, does the thing, but until it's observed, it doesn't have a job, and we're all molecules. And that means, like, my water's taking the shape of judgment and I can't stop. That was Cliff Notes version of what I got out of it.
Yes.
And I couldn't figure out how to apply it. And so when I stumbled on Access Consciousness work, I knew immediately, I'm like, this is quantum physics applied, because what it's doing is going, what if you didn't judge? And I'm like, oh, it's the judgment that's making the molecule into a sharp, pointy spear that's poking me. Like, if I didn't judge the molecule, if I could just observe it and choose and ask for things, all the molecules would vibrate in my general direction and they would just do what I want. But instead, what I want most of the time is to figure out the meaning and try to figure out why and try to make the right choice. And all of that was like sharp, pointy barbs to me. So I was like, how do I live in a world that doesn't, judgment actually kills? So that, if you ever watch the rice experiment with, I forget, there's all kinds of videos online now. Okay. You hate one jar and you love another. Put two different labels on those jars. You judge one jar and you have allowance for the other. You're going to have the same results. So it literally, physically kills our bodies. We have a chronic disease epidemic, and we could point to so many things, like the diet and the glyphosate and all the things. But the primary disease on this planet right now is judgment.
I would call it hate, maybe, or maybe just dysfunction. Maybe that's just the best word for it all, because we're not functioning in the way that we could to thrive. There is a version of us thriving to a maximum capacity, and we're not, because of dysfunctional ways of being. Because judgment, depends how you define it, can be something that is neutral in my mind, because it's just a word. So we're talking about different things. What you're talking about is not. It's hate, it's dislike,
Maybe,
it's
but you positively
loathing, maybe.
judged me and missed out on a whole bunch of information. So, positive judgment and negative judgment are the same thing. They make you miss what's there. You end up
Well,
not asking questions because you miss what's there. You miss what is in the light of judgment. So, there's a lot of harm done unintentionally because we decide things before we actually receive them. And so I think this is an ongoing conversation of what judgment is and what it isn't, and what we can be with ourselves to ultimately be functional and thrive.
absolutely. Yeah, there's my idea of what God the Father is in the Bible. This is just me being authentic, coming up what's in my mind, is there's a God that is accepting or allows. It has an allowance
Yeah.
for you. It's but then judging. That's what the story basically says. It's
That is
an
what the story
accepting
says.
but judging, but then forgiving after
Hmm.
judging.
I'm going to judge you, but then I'm going to forgive you. That sounds a
It's
little,
a
there's
strange
something
one.
there.
It's a strange one, and how I perceive that is the the most functional way of parenting. You may be judging me now. But to accept someone, or just any relationship, I think you accept someone completely, but if someone's not living up to their full potential, there's something that it makes you uncomfortable. It could make you uncomfortable. It could disturb you in some way, and you
Yeah.
could think that person, they have so much potential. I want them to do well. And you would say that's an awareness.
That's a
Not
desire. You want them to do well,
potentially.
and you want them to do well based on what you think well is. And most of
So,
us
mhm.
most of us then go about trying to make that person into what we think they should be instead of allowing their reality. And here, the truth is that with this is a whole other podcast, this thing about people, because the truth is some people choose things that work for them that don't work for me in close proximity. I could tell you 100 stories from my own
Mm,
family and a mother that belongs on the Hoarders show. Like there's a lot of dysfunction that doesn't belong in close proximity with my life because it doesn't work. But it doesn't mean I'm
mhm.
going to go out there and try to change her because that's working for her. So, like, that's a whole conversation around people. And when you really care about people and you are aware of a greater future for them, the hardest thing for us to do as people who can and will and do for ourselves is to sit on our hands and go, they're not asking me for anything and they don't want to change. And so, what am I going to do with this?
There's the practice of metta, loving kindness practice, where you send people loving kindness, which I think is beautiful, and it's like the most pure form of prayer, almost. And if you're praying for someone, you might say, "Oh, help them, go to college, and get that degree." I want them to get. I don't think you do that in metta. Metta is like, may they be healthy, may they be happy, may they be free from suffering. And those things, I think, are this is my conclusion. Those things, healthy, happy, free from suffering, are better than the alternatives.
My prayer would be, may they receive fully from the choices they're making that I cannot understand. And may they get everything out of those that they're seeking to find. And may they end up where they dearly want to go. And may I have the power and the strength to let go of the control to need anything different for them.
Well, that's powerful. Oh man. Anything you would like to finish on?
Brilliant conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like we got bogged down with the judgment thing, but that's a deep,
I don't think so.
deep,
I think it's
deep.
good. It's good.
Yeah.
It's big.
Yeah, we can go into some more personal relational stuff next time for sure. Yeah. It's been great having you on, Christel. Thank you for having a conversation with me. And a lot of food for thought. I will be meditating on this and pondering it for a while. And the next tree I see, I'll ask it.
Have a conversation.
I'll say, why are you here? What are you doing here?
What is the meaning of life, tree?
Yeah.
Thanks, Christo.